Thank you very much. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mute my laptop because otherwise I get a very strange foldback and hear myself talking 1 second later. So if anybody wants to speak to me with a comment or something, I'm not going to hear it because I'm sort of working by myself right now. Everybody nod if you can hear me well enough. Yep. Good. Okay. We're set up in the theater on the stage, even though this is a Zoom conversation. Mike Effinger is up in the light booth, and he's acting as the switcher. So he's going to be literally switching between the view where you can see me sitting at the table on stage to the view from on stage so that you know that we're in the theater. And then most of the time, we're going to be taking a look at the PowerPoint and all the shows that we, or all the slide shows that we're going to be doing. I'm going to zip through this pretty fast because 50 shows and 185 shows, there's no way we're going to be able to hit all of them. Brush. But I've still jammed quite a few slides in here. So I want to take you through a little bit of the history of the first, briefly of the college and then of the Nicolet Players themselves. Nicolet was founded in 1967. The first campus, the first 3 buildings on campus were completed around 1969. We are in the building that originally was called the Learning Resources Center, which is this building right here, the one closest to the lake and the bay. Here is the original Learning Resources Center. Just after it was built, there's no trees or anything growing around it. And in fact, there's a lot of things that are missing because the building has been remodeled so much. Over here on this side of the building, that's where the art gallery was for quite a while. It was built out. But otherwise, you can get a good idea of the architecture. You all have been on campus, and perhaps you know that this theater was, or the entire campus, the original buildings were designed by students of Frank Lloyd Wright, and the building architecture very much follows the architectural style of Frank Lloyd Wright and his Prairie School style. Long sloping roofs that overhang natural materials. Originally we had cedar shakes that were the shingles up above, cantilever decks hanging out. The whole thing was meant to look as if we're sort of growing out of the earth. Stone, natural materials, and lots and lots and lots of glass. And so some of you may be familiar with this building. This is the Roby House in Chicago, one of Frank Lloyd Wright's best pieces of architecture. And you can see the same thing, the low slope roofs overhanging, the cantilevered balconies hanging over, and everything is very, very geometrical in its design. Very little ornamentation you will find in Frank Lloyd Wright. The lines of the building actually become the ornament, because Frank Lloyd Wright was reacting to the frou-frou of the Victorian area, so there's no pasted on frou-frou. Everything is designed through, or all of the ornamentation comes through the line of the architecture itself. And that translated somewhat over to the theater itself. The first thing I'll mention is that the Nicolet Theater really wasn't meant to be a theater at first. It was simply meant to be a lecture hall that had 4 sections to it. And at the very last moment, before they began building, they changed their minds and they added a few things to turn it more into a theater. They put in these little light bays. They just simply inserted them up into the ceiling so that they had a very few number of lighting to light the stage. They took what was a janitor's closet that was behind this wall right here, and instead they turned it into the control booth, and they punched a little tiny window in the wall so that the person could, operating the lights, could look at the stage if they managed to look around the post that was right in the way of it. And then they didn't put seats in the 4th section of the theater, and that became kind of the backstage. And despite all of the remodeling and everything that we've been doing over the last 50 years, it's still something of, you can recognize it as more of a lecture hall than a theater. This is the original. You can tell this is real 70s look. Orange carpet, which I thought I would never see again. I thought it would die with the 1970s, but when we remodeled this building, if you go up to the second floor in a couple of the conference rooms, there's orange carpet. Nice, comfortable naugahyde back seats, different colors. I believe this probably it was somewhat inspired from the Guthrie Theater, which had similar types of seating when it was first built. But otherwise, a nice, humble little place. Let me show you a little bit of a drawing of the original theater. This is a plan view, a sky view of the first floor. Out here is the parking lot. And when you first come into the building, there's that giant fireplace in the middle of the lounge. And at that time, the lounge was completely open other than one little glassed-in area that was the game room for students that was later would be turned into the art gallery. The cafeteria and otherwise wide open. And then if we are to move into the theater area, first thing we'll point out is the stage. For the first 10 years of the theater, the stage was actually just a very small semicircle like this, what we would call a thrust stage, only 20 feet across, and everything was performed on this little area right here. As I said, this was a lecture hall, so we've got 3 sections that has permanent seats. This was supposed to be the 4th section of the lecture hall, and at the last second, they simply decided, let's not put seats in there. And this becomes the backstage area. At the time that there was built, there was nothing to divide the backstage from the stage itself, other than these little, or actually very big, heavy vinyl accordion doors that were stored in closets behind the theater wall. And they would then track out on tracks in the ceiling, and they would divide each of the sections into individual sections. And the idea was we could take a room that would seat 260 with all of the sections filled, and we could divide it into smaller classes of 70 or 80. No one that I ever talked to could remember any classes successfully being done that way, because those poor accordion doors were horrible. And you could hear right through them. So if somebody was teaching in this little room right here, the other room could hear it as well. But that was about the extent of the theater. 3 sections, a 4th section that became the backstage, a couple of little 2-person dressing rooms, very, very small, but you can fit 20 people in there if you need. And then here are the public restrooms that were accessible from the lounge. This little cubicle right here, the line right here, was actually an office, and it was the office of the first theater director of the Nicolet Players, Phil Boroff. And let me introduce you to Phil. I've never met Phil. There's very little stuff that's left over when I came to the college, other than a box of slides, a list, somewhat incomplete list of the plays that he did, and then lots of stories that I picked up over the years from the amazing Phil Boroff years. Dr. Phil Boroff was the first of 3 full-time directors that have run the Nicolet Players up until now. There's actually been 6 directors of the Nicolet Players. There were 3 others that were 1-year appointments that were filling in either between one of the full-time people leaving, or if they took a leave or something like that. And in Phil's era, the first 10 years, the place was absolutely rocking. Here is a shot of Phil and a cast sitting backstage having some notes for, I'm not entirely sure what show this would be. Maybe Barb or somebody will recognize it. I'll talk a little bit about the college when it first formed. This up until 1967, when the college was incorporated, there was no higher education anywhere in northern Wisconsin. And Dr. Brown and others got the idea to form the college. And when this place was first built, there was a community of people that just latched onto it. Because the college then and now was not just a technical college with courses in secretary science and police and cosmetology. It also had the other half, which was liberal arts, things that traditionally were covered by the University of Wisconsin. And when the college first formed, they loaded up the liberal arts side of the college with some very qualified faculty. Phil knew theater in and out. We had a full-time philosophy professor. And I wasn't there at the time, and mostly I just got stories from people that were there, but it was just a hopping campus. There were people there all the time doing theater. Phil would do 7, 8, 9 shows a year. One year, I saw 13 plays were done, and which is next to impossible for a one-person department. Now, many of those plays were one-act plays, but there were also 5 main stage shows, full-length plays that Phil and his merry band managed to put together. So it was quite a thing for the first 10 years when people just latched onto the college and they said, we have our own college now. And it was very much in tone like a full resident campus with our arts programs as well, with Phil at the helm of all of this. So let me take you through some of the shows that Phil put on. All I had was a box of slides and a handful of titles. So I had, at one point, I went through the slides and I started trying to match up the slides with the titles of the plays that I knew. This is one of the very first ones, and I'm pretty sure this is Black Comedy by Peter Schaefer, who brought us Equus and Amadeus. This was a long one-act play with just one gimmick to the whole thing. Anytime something was happening when the lights were on, what the audience saw was a black stage. But then, through a turn of events, all of a sudden there'd be a power failure, and the lights would go out for the actors, but for the audience, the lights would come up, so we would see the action of the actors stumbling around in the dark. It's an extremely clever play with lots and lots of physical comedy and lots of laughs. And we'll take a look a little bit at the theater right here. Here is the ceiling over the lecture hall stage, just a suspended ceiling, no room for lights or anything like that. The whole stage, the entire set, needs to be jammed onto that little 20-foot diameter thrust that pushes out into the stage. And if you see this reflective type thing, let me jump to the next slide and you'll see it carry over to the next play. There's that same reflected thing. That's the metal edge that is the end of these accordion curtains that could be drawn out. And that's how they would separate the backstage from the front stage, by just simply pulling out those curtains enough to just conceal what's out there. And then the actors would come through a slot and get onto the stage. So this was very much like Shakespeare's stage, just a simple platform thrust out into the middle of the audience, and sometimes no scenery or a limited scenery. And, oh, I'll check that note as well. Let me see. This fellow right here, I'm pretty sure is John Kirsch. Some of you may know John. He is a local Rhinelander character. He's still around. He shows up every 10 years, takes a part in a play, and vanishes. The play that we're looking right here is Dark of the Moon, a real 70s play. Even though it was written in the 1950s, it got revived in the 1970s, and all of the small theaters were putting on that kind of folk fable with music called Dark of the Moon. Jumping to another Boroff play, I think that is Phil standing right there. This is Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, another extremely 70s musical about a nice guy who just wants to find happiness, but he can't because the man won't let him. And they all dress in clown face with little tears on them, and they sing poignant songs about longing and wanting to have things and other stuff. Nobody does this show anymore unless they do it as a museum piece, but it was real popular in the late 60s and the late 70s. This gives an idea of the way the theater looked. The whole back wall was just a beautiful long cedar across it, and then you can see the simple thrust stage pushing out into the audience, and it's pretty darn small. If you walked off right, audience left, or walk off stage right, you walk into the audience. There is no way to exit stage right. So for the next 45 years, anybody that's designing sets, if they needed actors to exit stage right, the only thing that they could do is design a set that was pushed forward a little bit from the wall, and the actors would walk behind the set because there was just no exit or wings or anything to the stage right. There's also no place to put scenery. You can't do sets with multiple locations and roll the scenery off stage or fly it up into the wings, because there's no wings and there's no off stage, unless you literally pick up the walls and carry it up onto the fourth section backstage, which occasionally we did. This is the same show, I believe, and it just gives you a look at the actors. This shot is taken from the fourth section, looking at the actors ready to enter. And so they just are concealed from the audience by a wall here, and when it's time to enter, they just simply walk up on the performance. Phil did some unbelievably challenging shows, very, very collegiate shows that I probably would not do because I just don't think we'd get much of an audience. I am pretty sure that this is Christopher Fry's The Lady's Not for Burning, which is an epic poem done in rhymed verse in Shakespearean style about a medieval plot or a medieval 13th century story. And Christopher Fry is a very heady actor or writer like T.S. Eliot. And I have no idea what the turnout for these shows are. I assume they ran for one weekend. I don't know if there were big audiences that showed up, but they were doing a lot of full-length plays back then with some really challenging subjects. The Lady's Not for Burning by Christopher Fry, with starting
Usually
to get some extensive scenery.
They ran for 2 weekends.
Theater directors, the longer they got used to the theater, the more they figured out how to work out more and better scenery for productions. This is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, also very, very popular in the 1970s, adapted from the novel by Ken Casey, and it was adapted by a fellow named Dale Wasserman. Dale is a Rhinelander native. He is born and raised in Rhinelander until he moved to California. He adapted One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and maybe even more famously, he wrote The Man of La Mancha, the musical that you all know. That's from a Rhinelander native. He also wrote a lot for television in some of the golden years. I don't know if Dale showed up for this show or not. It's quite possible Phil was very connected, that he brought them up here. I've kind of heard a few references. And Barb says Dale was here, so he was here for the performance. So that's a confirmation of it. Dale would come back to Rhinelander once in a while. I got to work with him in School of the Arts when he headed up a playwriting session, and I got to work with him. Very, very smart and really, really theater savvy, and one of Rhinelander's own. You can if you know musicals, you probably are able to spot this pretty quickly. This is the Fantasticks. Small stage in the middle and fake sword play and a ragtag odd mix of characters, and that show has been performed since the 60s and is just a regular staple of community theaters everywhere. This show I immediately recognized because I'm very familiar with the play. This was my dissertation show when I was in Madison. It was my final play that I directed when I was in graduate school. And Phil knew his theater really well. He even knew theater publicity. If you're going to be doing Picnic, you have to get a shot of, or get a publicity photo of Madge standing and wistfully looking out over the prairies of canvas, hoping for a better life. It was a shot in all of the original publicity, and if you're going to do Picnic, you have to do that. And so here is a mid-70s version of Madge in Picnic. Just for example, when I did this production in Madison, there's my Madge sitting, leaning up against a post, looking out wistfully. And last spring, when Picnic was going to be my last play here before I retired, I was absolutely going to shoot a shot just like this of the Madge for that production as well. But the coronavirus came along and that show was not put on, and I don't know what's going to happen next. Still, in the Boroff years, and this might have been a Carolyn Maynard substitution because Phil, I think, went to London on a Fulbright exchange and a British professor took his place. This is The Night of the Iguana by Tennessee Williams. Again, a play that I would never dream of trying to put on here. It's long, it's tough, it's very, very challenging, but in the golden Boroff years, people were taking on these plays right and left. As I was looking at this, trying to piece together what it was, at first I thought it was Death of a Salesman because the roof line here, or the symbolic roof line, is taken straight out of Joe Mielsener's original design for Death of a Salesman on Broadway. But then I looked down and I saw in this little corner right here a well pump. And if you're doing a well pump, everybody, you know what that has to be. And the name escapes me, the Miracle Worker. So they put on the Miracle Worker and jammed everything onto this little stage. And the Miracle Worker needs a lot of room. You have to have an entire outdoors. You need to have a pretty large living room where a whole family can sit together. You have to have at least 2 bedrooms, but they managed to squeeze all of this onto that little semicircular stage. A little bit later into Phil's tenure, taking on, again, really challenging shows. This is the biggest and toughest of them all. 3 years of getting mugged in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Edward Albee's really rip-roaring show. It's extremely good and extremely difficult. And I realized that in the lead role right there is Marlene Kelly Davis, who did a lot of shows with Phil, the name I had heard quite a bit. And all of a sudden, about 10 years ago, she showed up again at the theater after being in Chicago for 20 or 30 years. Excuse me. Can you still hear me? And Kelly has been performing with a lot of our latest shows. If you saw Arsenic and Old Lace, she was one of the 2 old ladies in that great story. And as you can see, the scenery is starting to get more and more involved as the shows go on. That fireplace in the back of Kelly is still around and is shown up in quite a few of our plays as well. Phil's last show, just before he went off to seek fortune in LA, he picked a play by a fellow that writes a lot of plays and movies about a geeky Manhattan Jewish guy who has problems getting dates. And that character, or that writer, was Woody Allen. The title of this play is Play It Again, Sam, featuring a Woody Allen type character who just can't seem to get along with women, and he's socially awkward and other things. And in this play, he is met up with the ghost of Humphrey Bogart, who kind of takes him under his wing and teaches him how to be a little bit more of a ladies' man. It's a great comedy. And you will notice that even though it's a Woody Allen play, supposedly with a Woody Allen type character, here's another photo. The guy in the lead part is Phil Boroff, playing the part of Woody Allen, because Phil Boroff was a Woody Allen lookalike, a stunningly similar Woody Allen lookalike. Here in the middle of the play in a scene, hey, look, the fireplace, the same fireplace, got a coat of paint and is in the back room there. He's sitting there with Becky Vallon, who is still around. She's working in Wausau right now. I'll tell you the story that I know about Phil and his moving to LA, but I'm only getting it anecdotally, so I might be getting a little bit of it wrong. He moved to LA to start working in film and other things and kind of get out of the little town of Rhinelander. And one of the things that he did early on to just simply make a living is because he happened to look like Woody Allen, is he signed up with an agency that represented doppelgangers or people that looked like stars, and they would go out to parties and other things and impersonate characters. And the story goes that this agency lined up Phil for a Timex commercial, Timex watches, where he behaved very much as if Woody Allen is hawking Timex watches. And the agency promised that they would put a little disclaimer at the corner of the screen saying that this is an actor impersonating, this is not really Woody Allen. Well, when the commercial came out, apparently they didn't put that little disclaimer onto the screen. And Timex found out about, excuse me, the true Woody Allen found out about this commercial and objected to it appearing to be that he was hawking Timex watches. So he sued the commercial company, the agency, and Phil for taking his likeness, and succeeded. And people have told me that it's like up to $200,000. I don't know what the settlement was, but Phil took a hit, not for, and it really wasn't his fault. And I think he gave up his impersonating. He is still in LA. I have never talked to him. I haven't kept up with him, but a few people keep up with him. His name pops up a lot because he's a contributing editor to the Internet Movie Database, the IMDb. If you've ever gone there if you needed to find a movie or trivia, it's the #1 thing, database for film. And Phil is still contributing there and is doing very well in LA as far as I know. After Phil left, there was a fill-in by 1 year by a guy named David Ahrens, who also did some very challenging plays. And then they moved to the next Nicolet Players director, who ran it for 5 years, Tom Nash. Tom did a few changes to the structure, and it's partly because the nature of the college was beginning to change. The 70s were over. We were into the 80s now in the Reagan area, and things were getting a little bit tighter. People were getting a little bit busier, and that really militant group of theater people were starting to disperse, and they were starting to run short on performers and other things. So one of the things that Tom did is he moved the theater away from sort of a college theater that was with shows put on mostly by students into a community theater, following much more of a community theater model, opening up auditions to everybody. You didn't have to be a student, which is still the way we work. And choosing plays that were much more along the pop community theater route than the more collegiate things that Phil had been doing. And this is probably at the top of the list. I believe this is The Odd Couple by Neil Simon. And it's just a standard of community theaters everywhere. And it's a very, very good situation comedy. Everybody knows the play, the movie, the television show, and other things. There's not all that much of the Tom Nash era that I have records of either. I've got some files that have a few publicity negatives in them, but the photos of the shows, whereas Phil took 35mm slides of everything, mostly what I was able to find of shows from Tom were just Polaroids or some publicity, black and white publicity photos. But for 1980 until 1985, here are some of the shows that Tom Nash was putting on. I believe this is 10 Little Indians. Some of you may recognize Fern Stefanik sitting there. Fern was somewhat instrumental in the creating of the Northern National Art Competition and the Nicolet Art Gallery. This is Dracula. You probably can recognize that. To the right here is John Fortier, who was the head of the English department at Rhinelander High School for years. This was Glenn, who has since been in the movie business as Dracula, as Howard Backey, who has been in many, many plays here. Some of you may know Howard because he used to run the Apothecary in downtown Rhinelander. And this fine, upstanding young man right here is Tom Nelson, who has been worked with the Nicolet Players probably the longest and the most shows. A great singer, but also a really fun actor as well. This show did really well. They performed in October with a midnight showing, and from what I can see of the records, this was a real hit of a show. Phil did lots of musicals, sometimes 2 a year. This is one of the biggest. This is Pirates of Penzance. And you know, because Phil moved over to much more of a community theater, he pulled in tons of people to be in shows. I mean, this is not the entire cast, but it's much of the Gilbert and Sullivan company. I believe this is Tom Organasek, also known as Tommy O, who took over the Northern Lights Playhouse in Hazelhurst, called it Tommy O's. I think Emily Bodensteiner might be in here, and quite a few other people that may still be around in the area. So for 5 years, there was a big change in the thrust of the theater, much more community theater based, much more pop, built up a lot more audiences. And Tom also did a few physical changes to the theater. So let's go back to the plan and let me show you a few things that changed. One of the things that he did is, if you take a look at the stage here, what was a semicircle, he built some wings out so that you could have a little bit more room on the stage. However, when he built those little wings or platforms sticking out, it made it so that all of the curtains that were stored in here just simply couldn't be pulled out because they were obstructed. So they sat there for years and years until we finally got them removed. He built a divider wall rather than using those curtains to separate the offstage from the audience. He added some temporary curtains that were just hanging right here so people could slip in and out. When I first got here and I was doing my very first play here, the theater was in something of a state of disrepair, and this temporary wall was really just a little chipboard wall that was jammed between the floor and the ceiling and had several thousand pounds of platforms and scenery leaning up against it. And I was in the 3rd night of rehearsal, and all of a sudden the whole thing fell over, collapsed into the audience. So it gave me a week worth of stuff trying to clear everything out. Later on, I designed and built this little wall right here, right in the middle of the backstage area, so that we could take this wall that we made a much more substantial one after the collapse of that. We could take this wall apart and move it all the way over to this side of the audience, which would then open up this entire area, and we could fit in 80 more seats and get the seating capacity up to about 350. Otherwise, the seating capacity was 250 in the way that this was set up. Tom added some chairs in the back 2 rows there, which got the capacity up from 190 to 250. At first, they were those little fiberglass bucket seats that were around, and then a few years after that, I replaced them with chairs that I pilfered from the library. And then finally, these rows of chairs are still here. We finally got some very nice chairs that are regular height in this first row, but extra high so you can see over people in the last row. So Tom sort of did some changes to make the place a little bit closer to a theater. And then Tom moved on. He is owning a bed and breakfast in Wyoming or Montana, I think now. And then a kid from New Jersey who had just graduated from graduate school in Madison took over the position in 1985 and stayed there on and off for another 30 years until he retired just this past June. My job description at that point was very simple. It's the simplest job description I've ever seen. It just says director of theater, plays and teach classes as needed. That was the entire job description for that role. And at that time, when I got here, the Nicolet Players were doing 5 plays a year, and then the added teaching load of 2 or 3 courses. There's no way. I don't know how I managed to do it back then, and there's no way I could have accomplished that now. We have finally whittled it down to a much more manageable 1 play in the fall and 1 play in the spring. But at that time, I was ready and raring to go. It was my first job, and so I'll take you through quickly the first 5 plays. The first show that we did was Bus Stop by William Inge, a perfect first play because it's a very castable show. It's fun, it's a comedy, and it's written by William Inge, who I know extremely well because I did my dissertation show on it. I know what makes William Inge tick. So I felt very comfortable doing Bus Stop, simple 1-set show in a bus station, and we just basically meet the kind of people that travel through there and some of the conflict there. Closed that show, tore down the set. 5 days later, we are into rehearsal for the next play. The next play I chose a children's show called Step on a Crack, partly so that we could bus in the elementary schools from the Rhinelander district. At that time, there was a very active children's arts program and arts initiative that the college was working with, where we would put on productions and they would provide audiences. We also did public performances. This was Step on a Crack, which was done in late November, I think. We closed that, tore down the set, went into rehearsals for the next play, which opened 2 months later. The show that I chose was The Runner Stumbles by Millen Stitt. Nobody's ever heard of this title, but it's an extremely powerful play about a nun and a priest and some of the intrigue up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's actually based on a true life story where a nun murdered a priest up in the UP, and then this character or this author wrote a script about it. Heavy drama, and to my surprise, even though it was an unknown title and a heavy drama, very, very well attended, and one of the better shows that we put together, an extremely dedicated cast. For the final curtain call, I mean, normally you just do a standard curtain call. Characters run out in singles or in groups, they smile, they bow. But this cast was so invested in the show that I gave them the option of we can do a standard curtain call, or we can do a group call where the lights just simply come up and the actors are all standing in a semicircle. They all bow slowly together. The lights go down, and that's the end of the play. It's a very, very dramatic curtain call, but it's not quite as satisfying as being able to run out and smile and wave to your friends. But the cast wanted to do that. And after a very, very dramatic ending where the nun has died and the priest is in tears, we do this curtain call with a very, very slow bow. And it's the only time that I have done a show where we've held a curtain call and the audience, for one performance, sat there in silence. Hard-hitting ending, very, very dignified, slow curtain call, and the lights went out. The audience just sat there. Then they got up out of their chairs and left. Which most times you would say, oh, geez, that's a disaster. But that was actually something of a success because it was that moving for the audience. So I was kind of proud of that moment. The fourth show was actually 1-act plays, not full-length shows that I would directed, but I taught a directing class in the spring, and all of those students, as their final project, directed a 1-act play. And so we would have anywhere from 3 to 6 1-act plays. Sometimes they had to be spread out over a couple of weekends. That was where I learned if just enough people don't audition, you have to take a part. And so that's me in the center right there in a play called Terminal. For the fourth show in my first year with the Nicolet Players, this was the summer show. Tom had kind of set up the template that in the summer you do a musical, so I did a musical. This is a great little musical called Something's Afoot. It's a spoof of Agatha Christie musicals where actually everybody by the end of the show gets murdered in one way or the other. And it isn't until we hear a recording at the end that we find out that the murderer is actually the owner of this mansion who passed away and is having revenge upon all of the people that he didn't like. Funny show loaded with special effects and all the strange ways that people die. The first person to die is the butler who steps on a booby trap and explodes, and you can see the body of that butler right there. And at that point, everybody decides, well, I guess we should sing a song if people are being murdered. Moving into my second year, decided to do a drama. This is Whose Life Is It Anyway? A popular show in the mid-'80s turned into a movie. Features a person who was in a motorcycle accident and is a quadriplegic. And the entire play is built around this person sitting in a bed. He cannot move anything but his head. And the whole play is centered around him and his legal battle to try and get disconnected from life support system, because in his mind, his life was over, based on a real life case. So I designed a set where everything kind of zeroed in on this person with this target type thing where everything, all the lines in the play move into the character. Oh, Barb says Phil is not in LA. He now is in New York City. Thank you, Barb. For the spring show of that year, people had asked me what was I going to be doing next, and just out of coincidence, I had actually gotten something of a reputation, because if we back up, this is about a priest who murders a nun. This is about a terminal character who's in a hospital. This is about everybody got killed. This is about a guy who wants to die. And so when they asked me, what show are you doing next? I said, Death Trap by Ira Levin, another murder show, but this one a thriller, and maybe the best stage thriller ever written, at least in my estimation. And it is a true 5-person single set moneymaker of a show. Only 5 characters, incredible twists, still holds the record for the biggest scream moment that we've ever had in the theater, where the audience startles when a character that we thought was long dead suddenly appears in the doorway here. And a very, very good cast, including the 2 lead characters. This guy right here was an attorney in town who owned a dairy farm up in Sugar Camp. He later went on to become president of Nicolet College. That's Adrian Lorbetsky. And this guy right here was the activities director at Rhinelander High School for a while. That was Charlie Laham, performing in a really great show, Death Trap. Also included Emily Bodensteiner. Moving into the next summer, I went again, did a musical, also found out that if not enough people show up for musicals, you need to take a part. This is called Gold Dust, a great silly little show about the gold rush era and the hijinks that go ahead. It also got me to the point where I realized that there's a pattern that happens with musicals. Since this show, we have never had enough actors show up to cast the entire show. So every musical that we've done, I have had to always call up and beg somebody to take a part. It's really difficult to get a full pit band. Most of the time, we just settle for the music director sitting somewhere on stage playing the piano. It's hard to line up musical directors. It's a tough kind of show to do. And after the first few years, I started scaling back on musicals. They are the most requested thing. Why aren't you doing more musicals? And that's partly why we don't do them so much. They are incredibly demanding, and they're hard to fill up all the people that we need, despite everybody wanting to do them. This is personally one of the best shows that I think we've done here on the Nicolet stage. This is Children of a Lesser God by Mark Meadow. It was turned into an Academy Award-winning movie, and it is a real challenge for the actors to do, particularly this character right here. The actor is Randy. He has to know his lines, he has to know American Sign Language, and he also has to speak all of the lines of his romantic partner, who is deaf. So he not only says his lines, he is saying, or basically interpreting, what she is signing so that we, the audience, can hear what the story is. So he's pretty well, it's a monologue carrying almost the entire play, just coming from this guy. This is Randy Clewer, who was in lots of our plays. He, I believe now, is a nurse up in the Minocqua area. This is Ann Catlett, who was a nurse at the time and is now a doctor down in Madison, Wisconsin. For the next summer, I found that we just didn't have a music director, so instead I decided for the summer offering I'd switch to just a comedy, and this was a big one. And a great chestnut. It's You Can't Take It With You by George S. Kaufman. Every high school has done You Can't Take It With You. It's one of the great standard chestnuts, following this zany family living life by their own rules in Brooklyn, and meeting up a bunch of straight-laced people that and the fireworks commence. Great comedy and a great combination of people. We're skipping a few shows, but I'll point out this one. You may recognize it just from looking at the setting. This is Steel Magnolias by Robert Harling. I stumbled across something when I tried to get the rights for Steel Magnolias. I had just seen Steel Magnolias on Broadway, and I said, this is absolutely something I want to do. And this is one of those plays that when the rights become available, everybody does it because it's very, very castable and it's well written. You may know it was made into a movie with Julia Roberts, but the stage play is still being done nowadays. This play was still running on Broadway when we produced it, which just doesn't happen because here's how hit plays usually work. They make it up to Broadway, they become a success, they will stay on Broadway as long as they can, and at that point nobody is allowed to produce them. Why? Because you don't want an audience to say, well, I won't buy this $200 ticket for a Broadway show. I'll go just see it at the local theater. So they really hold the rights for amateur companies until the very last minute. So it runs on Broadway. Then if it's a musical, it may tour for several years. And so there are plenty of good Broadway shows right now that are in the touring stage, and are not becoming available to regular theaters. After they exhaust those audiences, they will then open up the rights to professional regional theaters like the Guthrie or Milwaukee Repertory. Why? Because they can charge them $2,000 a night for royalties as opposed to $100 a night for amateur shows. And then finally, after that has been finally exhausted, usually 2 years after a play debuts on Broadway, then they open up the right to high school, college, and nonprofit community theaters. Well, I loved this show. I got a copy of the manuscript, and I happen to know the person at the agency that represented these plays, and I just bothered him for about a month trying to get him to grant us permission to put on the show. And basically my angle was, look, we're way up in northern Wisconsin. The closest professional theater is 200 miles away. Nobody's going to notice if we do this show. Can you just give us a permission? And ultimately, he just kind of caved in, gave us the permission, and so we put on the show up here while it was still running on Broadway. So technically, and we've done this 5 times, we have done the Wisconsin premiere of certain plays because I would slip them in under the wire, and just because I knew the guy, he would let us do it. He said, okay, I'll do it, but under this condition, you will only advertise it to the students. And I said, sure. And of course, you know, we're a commuter campus and our students come from 7 counties, so I still managed to slip those through. That's Steel Magnolia's wonderful, wonderful 6-woman show, and a real tearjerker at the end, a very, very moving show. At this point, the college was starting to scale back, and one of the things that they did was they would not allow people to teach classes with only a handful of students. They put a limit. So the directing class that I had been teaching for quite a few years, but sometimes only having 4 or 5 or sometimes 6 students, they just said, you're not going to do that anymore. So I no longer had a directing class, and I didn't have students to do the one-act plays. So instead, I opened it up to area high schools and invited them to come perform on the Nicolet stage, and we started a tradition of a one-act play festival. And so this is one of the first. This is The Brute by Chekhov with an American translation. I showed you this picture because, excuse me, this fellow standing right here is George Roman, who was in high school. George now runs the Roman Cinema, the movie theater, but he was quite the actor when he was a younger lad. Around 1990, I decided that I put in my 5 years at this small college, and that I was going to go either pursue a career moving up the ladder in higher education or launching out into the professional world. And so I quit the college, and the college went and found a replacement, Dr. Fred Allerman, which is director number 5, who was here for 1 year. He did 3 shows, one of which was, again, the Fantasticks. And you may recognize a few people here. That's Tom Nelson, the singing upholsterer. That's Howard Bakke. That's Father John Biggs from the Episcopal Church. After 1 or 9 months, Fred just said, this is for the birds. This is directing 3 plays a year and teaching a load of courses and everything. And so the college asked me if I would be interested in coming back. And at that point, I was very interested in coming back because it was a good, steady job. I moved to Minneapolis at first, and discovered very, very quickly that if you wanted direct plays, you really had to have your own theater company. There weren't just places that were just hiring directors. I ended up doing most of my work doing lighting design, in fact, to the point where I was turning down jobs. But after 8 or 9 months, I was making well into 4 figures. And when the college offered to have me come back, I said, sure, I'd be glad to come back. So it's one of my quit the college and return moments. But I came back with lots and lots of new ideas, including knowing quite a few really good playwrights that had unpublished plays that were really good. And this was one of them. It's called Losing It. It's just a dumb 3-person comedy about 3 guys living in the backwoods, and one of them is just his wife has left him and he's at the end of his rope. And basically, it's just 3 guys commiserating about the fairer sex and doing hijinks and whatnot. It's a good, silly little comedy. And there is one point in the play where they all have to run inside because there's suddenly a rainstorm that ruins their barbecue. And I decided that I really wanted to have a rainstorm on the stage. So on this roof of this shack, you can't see it here, but this is a corrugated tin roof right there. Right above it, I put a length of PVC piping with a bunch of holes drilled in it, and we ran a hose from that all the way up to the dressing room. And when it was time to rain, we just turned on the water, and water poured off the roof, as well as out of a little spout in this this umbrella here, and it rained on stage. At the end each show, we had probably pumped about 50 gallons of water onto the stage, and I just put a fan out and let it dry off, knowing that it would destroy the floor of all of this water sitting on it, which was fine because the floor was starting to peel up. It had so many coats of paint on it that if we ever rolled anything heavy across it, the paint would actually start to buckle. So when we pulled up this platform, the floor was just mountainous, and we ripped the whole thing up. And I noticed that the paint on the floor was over a quarter of an inch thick. So I sliced a section of it and went over to the biology lab and took a photo of it with a microscope. And what we see here is the history of the Nicolet Players in sort of the way geological strata works. This is the most current show, and as we move down, we are moving back in time of all of the sets or all of the floor paintings that have been over the years. And you can see it alternates between black and the color because that's the way it works. You paint the floor black after a show, and then the next show you paint it whatever color you need, and then you paint it black again. This is Step on a Crack, moving down here. This is the Mikado, and moving now we're into the Phil Boroff era, and so on. So we preserve the stage floor and the history of the Nicolet Players. One of the shows that I did an unusual little children's show with a fantastic title was called Revenge of the Space Pandas, or Binky Rudich and the Two-Speed Clock. And it was written by David Mamet, one of the greats of American theater. And it was the biggest piece of crap I had ever come across after I read the whole thing. It makes very little sense. And it's a real struggle to even get through reading it, but I decided to do it anyway, partly because I was thinking there's got to be something good about it, but I swear David Mamet got drunk over a 3-day weekend and wrote this thing. So I did what often you do when a play is really struggling as far as its writing and its content. I filled it up with lots and lots of spectacle. So this was a big costume show. We had these gigantic pandas. We had lots of special effects. Lots of music fit into it and video projections, and we loaded it up with all sorts of visual things, which actually we somewhat fixed a crummy script. Aristotle, when he was writing about drama, said there are 6 components of drama, and the first 2 are the absolute most important: plot and character. And at the very bottom of the list, he said music and spectacle, those are parts of drama, but they're not as important. But a trick in directing is, if things suck, you just add the music and you add to the spectacle. And so a lot of times you'll see some really, really flashy movies that have lots and lots of special effects, but really are pretty slim on plot and character. But this was a success. In fact, so much of a success that I revived it. That play was performed in February. I revived it again in the summer, with opening up for a whole new cast and completely changing around the special effects. And that was somewhat successful as well, because I was kind of running out of ideas and didn't want to do a musical. So we redid the kids' show. Into the mid-90s, the Oneida County Courthouse, the 3rd floor courtroom, had been remodeled. What used to be just a crummy little courtroom with a suspended ceiling, Judge Kinney discovered that, oh my gosh, this ceiling goes all the way up, and he got together a lot of money to turn that ugly little courtroom into a restored, beautiful, historically accurate courthouse. And he contacted me and asked me if I would be willing to do a play to celebrate the opening of it. And it sounded like a great idea. He was hoping for something like 12 Angry Men. But I settled on a little less known play called Nuts by Barbara Streisand, of all things, and Tom Topor, but a true set in the courtroom type play. So we did this performance at the Oneida County Courthouse. So if you ever go to the 3rd floor of the courthouse and sit in the pews there, which have nice, comfortable, padded seats, that's because I paid to get padded seats for these performances, because otherwise it was really uncomfortable sitting in those chairs. This was the last summer production that I did. We just were doing less and less with summer shows. We were getting less and less from the audience showing up unless it was a really well-known show. But mostly, the actors just don't really want to devote 6 weeks of rehearsal in a very, very short summer. So this was sort of the very last one that we did. And even at that point, not enough people, I think only 3 men showed up for auditions. And so I had to take the lead part of Garfinkel in a play called Other People's Money. And at that point, Garfinkel was supposed to be a really, really big guy, and I was only 180 pounds right then, so I had to wear a fat suit. But now I could probably play Garfinkel without makeup. And then this gal that just showed up out of the blue. She had just moved into town and got a job with St. Mary's Hospital as an occupational therapist. That's Kay Anderson, who I cast opposite me in this Other People's Money, and found out that Kay was not only a very, very good actress, but later on I discovered that she was a spectacular costume designer and creator. And this began a really, really fruitful relationship with Kay and me over the years. Any costumes, if you've been to the theater and you go, wow, those are some amazing costumes, that's Kay's work. And we'll start looking at some of them. Almost a year later, the next spring, I was going to do a charming little play with lots of senior citizens called Mornings at 7, but hardly anybody showed up. So I had to choose a backup play, and I have a list of plays that I can do as emergencies just in case I'm not able to do a show. And this one is called Educating Rita, a 2-person play, but it's a full-length play, which means that these 2 actors basically are doing 2 hours worth of dialogue, and it's a very chatty play. So Kay agreed to play the part. This guy right here is Rex Benson. He showed up for about 3 or 4 years in the Rhinelander area, and Rex was a character. He was a semi-retired professional actor that had property up in the Eagle River area. Rex was a member of the Mighty Carson Art Players, if you remember Johnny Carson, and had been in TV commercials and some other things. Just a kind of a real hustler and a fun guy. And he took the part of the professor. This is the story of a professor that tries to do sort of an Eliza Doolittle with this saucy little gal that wants to get an education. And so for 2 hours, Kay memorized all of her lines and also most of Rex's lines, because Rex was mostly improvising his lines throughout the play, and Kay had to kind of keep up with it. But it was a fun show. Swinging the other way, the college had finally, finally to talk them into getting me a paid or a part-time paid assistant, a student assistant, because up until then, all of the scenery and all the sets and all the technology was something that I did on the weekends with the help of volunteers and maybe a work study, but otherwise you build it and you direct it. And finally, we got the college to commit to giving me a student. So they had created a student assistant position, which was a little bit more reliable than a work study. And I got a very gifted gal that was a student at the college at the moment. Her name was Marge Smith. She was not only, like to do all the building of scenery and things, but she also wanted to branch into scene design. This is the Diary of Anne Frank. It is one of our best shows, and it's partly because of Marge's set, because she designed this set. Normally, you just built an enclosed, claustrophobic little set with walls and everywhere showing the hiding place for Anne Frank and her family. Marge instead kept this with a few walls, but otherwise kept it wide open, and you can't quite tell what this is, but behind the entire set, all the way around, were gigantic 12-foot high black and white monochromatic paintings of goose-stepping Nazi soldiers. So those are the feet of soldiers goose-stepping. And every time you looked at that stage, there was that big, bad Nazi image in the background just looming over things. And it had this incredible feeling of the tension. This is without a doubt the best written play I have ever encountered of the modern area by Ruth and Augustus Getz. It is just a symphony of writing adapted from Anne Frank's diaries. This was the show where I learned that Kay could do costume design. We did a simple, fun little musical about a group of people that put on a musical based on a Greek tragedy, the story of Agamemnon. But it's all done campy style, and some of the costume is really over the top, particularly this one character who keeps showing up in her own little homemade costumes as part of the gags of the show. And Kay just went all out in putting these costumes together, and I said, oh my gosh, we have got a credible resource here, somebody that is willing to take it on and also do spectacular costume work. So this is the Agamemnon character, Tom Nelson. Here's Howard Baki over here. It was a great, fun, and relatively unknown musical, but a good hit. Later on, a year later, I decided that, boy, I thought I fixed Revenge of the Space Pandas, so I'm just going to write my own play. So I wrote a little children's play, kind of following the same idea of mixing science fiction in with children's story. Basically, I took the story of the Ugly Duckling and updated it to kind of an off-world alien type thing, and cast the show. Mixed in a lot of younger kids. Never worked with animals or children, but this was a fun cast. The one in the silver tube right here was my son, Alex. This little kid right here who was in James William Jr. No, I don't think he had even reached the junior high yet. That is Scott Kirby. Some of you may know Scott Kirby, the musician from the area. That's Scott when he was a little kid. Just a bundle of uncontrollable energy, but a real hoot. And the lead character, Dudley, was played by Mike Miller, who went on to get his PhD in engineering and worked in the US Patent Office and moved back into town just half a year ago and came back and was in the very last play I did. Ultimately, the story is where Dudley, the sluggish type character, turns into a cocoon, gets superpowers, and defeats the evil character that is trying to take over the world. It was a fun little show. It seemed to sell really well. Kids laughed and screamed, and my mom came over from New York, came over to the area to see the show that I'd written, and she stayed for 3 performances. She liked it so much, and she gave it really good reviews, which is enough for me. So that was the Nicolet Players, Dudley and the Magnificent Misfits, an original play. This was a off the beaten path show written by one of the playwrights that I met during my time in Minneapolis, called Betty the Yeti. That is Kay Anderson as Betty the Yeti. It was set in the Pacific Northwest. It really should be Betty the Bigfoot, but Yeti rhymes better. It's about a lumberjack who comes across a threatened Yeti species that nobody knew was around. I mentioned this one because this costume, Kay spent about 3 months before this creating the costume. She had pulled about 20 of the old ratty wigs that we had in our storage, and with one of those little tiny crochet hooks that's used in tatting or rug, or very, very small for rug hooking, she got a unitard, a full-length leotard, and for hours every night, she took each strand of hair and punched a hole in that unitard until the entire thing she had created basically a wig that was a full bodysuit. It would cost thousands of dollars to get something like this made, and Kay made this fantastic Yeti outfit. One show, we decided that we would try and take it on tour, so we chose a very small show, 2 women, called A Couple of White Chicks Sitting Around Talking. It's a pretty simple little nonsense comedy. Built a set that could be disassembled and put into a van, and I worked out a deal with 3 theaters in the area in Tomahawk, Eagle River, and Three Lakes, and I worked with the drama clubs there, and I said, look, if you get the word out and as many tickets as you can sell for the production of this in your high school, you get to keep half the profits. So we toured, we did a weekend here at the college, and then we toured to those three places, meeting with some success, but it really depended on how hard the high school kids tried to get the word out. I learned a little bit about what some of the other communities are like. Generally here, the people that come to the theater are familiar with Nicolet and the college and the long tradition. In Three Lakes in particular, this play was a little risque. I think one character says, son of a bitch, and there's some drinking. But I got letters afterwards from these people that went to see our touring production in Three Lakes about that elite bunch of college people that brought that show to our little theater, and they didn't care for it. And it wasn't that rough a play, but it was a good stretch. Not a good stretch, but a good solid hit was Blithe Spirit by Noel Coward, Randy, who was in Children of a Lesser God, and Elvira, the ghost that comes back to torment her husband. The Curious Savage, probably the biggest set we have ever done on the stage here. I needed to recreate the old school asylum, not the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest asylum, but the asylum of the 20s, that were these gigantic big rooms where the rich and powerful kind of went. The philosophy then is that you just go back and have kind of a vacation if you have mental issues. And it's a fun, charming story about this rich old lady who goes to this asylum mostly to get away from her nasty children, where she meets four zany people and finds out that really these people know more about being sane and understand life much more than the sane people in the rest of the play. I'll mention one thing about this. I've mentioned before that when you build a set, if somebody needs to enter from the right, you had to push the set forward from the back wall, and so that people would have to crawl behind the scenery if they needed to enter from the stage right. And there were lots of entrances here. One of the people that was in this cast had injured his hip, and he couldn't bend over. So everybody else who needed to come enter through here, they would sneak behind it, but they had to bend over and go underneath the windows here. But Adam was not able to bend over, so we came up with a unique solution. We draped a black cloth over his head, but it was transparent enough that you could kind of see where you're going. And when about 10 minutes before he had to do his entrance, he would stand here and he would very slowly walk across here. But because there was a black curtain in the background, you can't really notice it because you were looking at the actors in the front. But every time I would make sure I would stand there and I go, oh, there goes Adam, slowly moving across to make his entrance to the right. Round about this time, this is early 90s, is when I launched the Nicolet Live Performing Arts series. Up until then, the things that happened in the theater were the plays that I did, a couple of WXPR concerts, and then if we just heard something was touring through, we'd book them and sell tickets. And the Nicolet Live was actually an attempt at actually putting together a full season of touring shows. Started out with about 11 events, and up until now is up to 20 to 22. But it's a real mixed bag of concerts. You all know this. It's concerts, it's lectures, it's touring theater, it's Second City, and local events as well. And here's good old Tom Nelson in his first concert here for the Nicolet Live. So at this point, the Nicolet Players, which is the theater producing group, is now folded into part of the entire Nicolet Live series. Although the Nicolet Players, still 2 weekends of performances, 7 to 8 performances. The money that we get from the Nicolet Players pretty well is what underwrites the money that we spend on these other things. Half of our budget or our income from our events come from Nicolet Players revenues. We always make more than what we spend for bringing in these artists. We try to hit around the break-even point, but the Nicolet Players is one of the things that makes that work. Musical time. This time I teamed up with the Rhinelander High School Drama Department, and we did a joint production of Into the Woods, which is a massive show by Stephen Sondheim, and quite a big undertaking because you have to have some pretty extensive scenery. So I did all the technical design work, and the high school director did the directing of the play, which is just fine with me. And so we started out with little vignettes in the front apron of the stage, and then after about 15 minutes, those lift up into the ceiling and reveal the big setting behind. Multiple locations and lots of things moving in back and forth. All of these trees would track on and off, and other pieces of scenery would roll on wagons, and other backdrops would come down. It was pretty big production, and it really kind of used that beautiful Rhinelander High School auditorium to the max, because it's a wonderful, huge, old school theater. Back onto the Nicolet stage, this is a show called The Musical Comedy Murders of 1940. It's not a musical, it's a comedy, and it's, again, a spoof of the Agatha Christie type things. And I'll just mention the setting. An artist by the name of Edward Gorey once designed a little buy the book at home and make yourself a little set for Dracula. And I had that little miniature model, and I decided that's what I want the stage to look like. So I literally took those drawings and found out that I had permission to be able to do that because I bought the book, and enlarged them on a photocopier. So this was just simply a set made out of just plywood, and the drawings back here is actually 11 by 17 sheets of paper that we had enlarged and enlarged and enlarged and enlarged, and up until it was about 2,000% bigger than the original. And my tech director took those sheets of paper and had to glue them up one by one to make up that whole set and get everything to line up and keep track of everything. This is another one of those plays that I was producing before it had even left, well, actually it had just left Broadway and was in the regional theaters. This show is called Wit, one of the lowest attended shows because it is about a scholar that was an expert in John Donne who was dying of cancer. So it's not a real big seller, and I wonder why not many people came to see this, but it was a very, very innovative and highly dramatic show. Again, following, I brought back the little target motif that we had from Who's Life, and for this particular scene, we actually used a scrim that wrapped around the stage so you could see through the curtain. And it was a very good show, but not seen by a whole lot of people. This was seen because everybody knew what it was, because if you see a well on stage, it means that it's the Miracle Worker. And so we brought back the Miracle Worker with young Heidi Cray, who was just a little blast of an actress playing the lead part. In the late 90s, I was still struggling with trying to manage the whole performing arts series. I didn't know too much about how to run these things, so I finally, after several years of trying to make the thing work, I decided I need to get a little bit more educated. So I found out that New York University had an intensive 8-week program, 8 in the morning till 5 at night, Monday through Saturday, for 8 weeks straight in arts administration. So I went back to New York and took that course in arts administration. And 6 days a week for that time I'm taking the classes, and then right after that I used my NYU student card, which was a gold mine because you could go to any Broadway or off-Broadway theater, show that card, and if they had any of the VIP seats that they hadn't sold, they give it to you for $5. So for 8 weeks, I managed to see just about every show in New York and then go home and do homework and start up again. So I came back really energized and decided to do a very unusual German show called The Physicist, sort of a cautionary tale about the dangers of fascism, and did this very, very unusual German expressionism play. And I'm not sure, I think the audience was kind of scratching their heads, but it kind of was this blow your mind, very, very highly dramatic play of issues and other things that maybe I did more for my own gratification than anything else, but it was a fun show. Speaking of doing something that you just wanted to do, this was my 50th show, my 50th main stage show at the Nicolet Players. And to kind of commemorate that, I decided to do something very different than what I had been doing in the past. Generally, you always have open auditions. You never precast anything, because if word gets out that the director precasts people, or if you just start doing shows with the same bunch of people over and over, it's the death of any community theater group. So I'm constantly trying to get new blood and other things, except for this show, where I chose my favorite, personal favorite modern era play, The Real Thing by Tom Stoppard, and I just handpicked all the people that I wanted to be in this show. And it was a great, great comedy, somewhat flawed because the characters are unlikable, but I felt that we were very successful in kind of turning that around and making them much more unlikable and enjoyable than other productions that I've seen. Every regional theater in the U.S. In the month of December shuts down everything they're doing and they put on A Christmas Carol. And the reason why they do that is because it pays the bills for the rest of the year, because everybody goes to A Christmas Carol. So we did the same thing, had 8 performances in December and sold out every blessed show. And it was a big hit. Great combination of little kids in the show, plus adults. And was a big hit, so much so that we brought it back several years later. By this point, we were no longer had a student assistant. We had a part-time carpenter that was helping to build all of our sets. So my sets were getting much, much more complicated and finished. And I think this is one of the best. This is Proof by David Auburn. Another one of those plays that when the rights become available, everybody does this show. Single set, Chicago brownstone, the backyard. And these walls were actually just blue board styrofoam that we routed out and then hand painted all of these bricks. But it was a great 4-person play. It's been made into a film as well, and a good show, still being produced. Produced here, but nowhere else, was the Hodag Increments. Mike Skubal, a playwright, had moved back here and had this show, kind of chronicling the life of Gene Shepard and the whole Hodag myth. And so we put this show on here, starring Larry here as Gene Shepard and a real hodgepodge cast of other people that made up the Hodag story. For a musical, we decided to do Little Shop of Horrors, which means that you need to have a plant. In fact, you have to have 4 different plants, because the plant that starts out as a small seedling and grows more and more and more, you need to create that. But Kay thought she was up to it, so between Kay, myself, and another fellow that was a welder that created the frame for these things, we created the little Audrey plant. Which is always a puppet. In this case, it's just a puppet that was controlled underneath the table. There was a little rod there that the actor controlled the puppet. It gets a little bit bigger, and at this point, this little jacket that the guy's wearing, this is a fake arm. That isn't his arm. That's a dummy arm. His real arm is hidden under the jacket and is sticking into the plant so that he can talk to himself or talk to the plant, and he would activate the plant. Then it gets bigger, and this plant created the frame welded by Jim, and Kay created the casing on the outside. There's a puppeteer who is underneath the stage right here that's operating this particular plant. And then finally, when it's at its largest, it's a big plant that's controlled by wires and pneumatics to make it actually talk, because it's a talking plant. It also has to eat people. So we had to make the thing workable. We sunk a lot of time and money into this thing, and other theaters found pictures of it. So we sold this for a goodly amount of money to Wausau Community Theater. And for the next several years, I kind of tracked this set of plants as they went from one theater to the next. I think it wound up back in Wausau right now, but it's been in quite a few different shows. We tried doing a haunted house. It was extremely successful. We made $15,000 over the month of October. This one was done in the old projection building on the old drive-in theater, the Roman drive-in theater, which is next to the grounds, or right next to the St. Mary's Hospital. I used up a gift certificate for a free flight from Rhinelander Flying Service and got an aerial view. And here's sort of the map. We got the hospital to allow people to park in their lot. Then they went across the street. They traveled through the woods here in the dark. They went into this first tent, which was where a Z line was, where they lined up. And then they went into the projection room, which we turned into a bunch of different exhibits, scary exhibits, then into another big tent with more rooms, and then into a fourth place where there were concessions, and if community groups wanted to sell anything, they were free to use that tent, and then they went off and went back to their cars. It was about 20 minutes through the whole thing and $5 a person, and we had hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people pass through. Made a lot of money, and after we paid the expenses, we gave it to the JCs that helped out, the Rhinelander Animal Shelter, a number of other things as fundraisers. This is one of the rooms, the Frankenstein room. This is actually the projection room of the studio. These are the windows where they projected through. We didn't do too much. A lot of this is the original equipment from that projection room, and we strung through chains and other things, but this is where an animated Frankenstein-type creature comes to life and terrifies the audience that was standing here. Romeo and Juliet, the first of the Shakespeare plays that we did. In order to do this, to get lots and lots of people, we did it at a time where the high schools are done with their show, because we needed lots and lots of kids. And of course, Kay's spectacular costumes, but this was quite a success, including some sword play that was very, very complicated. I heard a professional sword play fight choreographer who came up and trained all of our people in the sword play. And of course, Kay's costumes rounded the whole thing out, but quite a success. And it kind of said, I think we can do Shakespeare here. As long as we can find shows that have women in them, of which there are 3. This is The Passion of Dracula, the biggest money maker next to A Christmas Carol. I followed the same pattern that Tom Nash did. We performed this in October with a midnight showing on Halloween Eve. Lots and lots of special effects, smokes, and other things, neck breaking and stranglings. And of course, lots and lots of blood. In this point, the very final moment of Dracula, this stake right here was filled with red food coloring or stage blood. And when it was struck, little holes in the back of it burst, and throwing blood onto everybody and everything in the background. And of course, it sold lots and lots of tickets. Also a great Tudor style set. If you take a look at this fireplace here, at this point I knew what I was doing in the fall and the spring, and so in the spring I knew I need a fireplace, so I took this and moved it over here, repainted it, and this became the setting for a show called I Hate Hamlet, about a young TV actor who meets up with the ghost of John Barrymore, who teaches him how to be a Shakespearean actor. Lots of sword play, and probably my favorite set that we built here on the Nicolet stage. Oh, okay. Another great show, but not well attended. This is True West by Sam Shepard. An extremely well-written show, a 4-person play, funny, but biting and harsh. And I think that's why we just didn't draw too many people, but fantastic acting from Dan Brecky of Brecky's Resort and Charles Lynch, who has been in a lot of our plays. A couple of brothers who are just rivals with each other, and as the play moves on, they fight more and more and more till by the end of the play, the show or the stage is just completely a wreck. At one point, this guy, to prove that he's a man, goes out and he steals toasters from around the neighborhood and decides to actually make toast on stage. So the summer before, I hit all the garage sales and bought all of these toasters and lined up a bunch of amps so that we could actually plug in the toasters and put them, cook toast on stage. But not well attended because it was a rough show, not in terms of the language, but in terms it was a lot of fighting. This show does not have fighting. This is a wonderful, peaceful show on Golden Pond. Everybody knows the movie with Henry Fonda and Katharine Hepburn. We did the original play version, which the movie was based on, built this beautiful set of a Vermont house on Golden Pond. On one of the college printers, I took a picture of Jenny Weber Lake and blew it up and printed it out on a big plotter and taped all the pieces together. So the Golden Pond, at least in our version, was Jenny Weber Lake that you could see in the background. A fireplace all made out of painted styrofoam, and otherwise, you know, one nice little cabin feeling and a great, wonderful feel-good show. Also, feel-good was a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. Another musical filled with Kay's costumes and cartoonish type drawings that this guy right here, Joe Mangles, who was an artist, drew up, and then we had them expanded. And I brought in a paint crew from students from UW Stevens Point to paint our whole set. We built the structure and they painted it. This I painted myself. This was our second Shakespeare play during my tenure. The Comedy of Errors, also very doable play, lots and lots of women parts, funny if you can follow the plot twists, and more of Kay's costumes. Kay based this on what Shakespeare intended, using the characters from Commedia dell'arte, which is a theater movement in the 16th and 17th centuries. You may recognize Arlecchino, or the Harlequin, which was one of the stock characters. Well, Kay researched all of these characters, then translated into what she wanted for the show, and then built the costumes. Another Commedia character is Columbina, which Kay took that costume, created her own rendering, and then built the costume. So we had all of these Commedia characters on stage. Someone on staff here wanted to document the creating of sets, so he took time-lapse pictures, so you can just watch our set slowly being built, bit by bit, painted bit by bit. The settings for plays, they don't come in a kit. They don't come with the script or anything. You basically have to decide and create the design yourself, and just like building a house from scratch, you design it, build it, and ultimately paint it and everything else. So a lot of times people just walk into the theater and they just say, well, they got the set from somewhere. They didn't. Somebody had to design it, and then somebody had to take those drawings and build it and finally paint it until we had a set that was lit and populated with the actors that worked for 6 weeks learning the lines and finally performing the play. Another haunted house. This time we did it in an old warehouse across from McDonald's. This building has been torn down since then, but we had the entire second floor, big wide open area that we built a maze into, and here was just kind of a map of where each group of people would pass through. where they would get scared or encounter one thing or another. I'll just mention this one. They walk through this room right here, through some doors, and then on this wall right here, there's a little TV screen where an animated character would distract them, and they would stand around and look at that screen. Nobody would look behind them, because in the shadows, we built the front end of a diesel locomotive, 12 feet high, with lights and other things, and it was on wheels, and we had a sound system that blared a horn and the lights came on. So at a given point, all of a sudden they'd say, hey, turn around, and this thing would light up, and then one of the grips, one of our volunteers, would push the thing forward and scare the daylights out of everybody because they were all too busy looking at the screen. We also mounted a flash camera up here, so the moment where that train blasted its horn and the lights came on and it started moving, we snapped a picture. And here are some of the people caught in the middle of the train flaring at them. And I've got hundreds of these, but these are some of the best. As they made their way through the maze, when they finally reached the end and they were safe, we had somebody sitting there with a laptop, and they showed them their picture. And if they really like their picture, for $3, we'll print you a copy right there. And we had a little photo printer. And we made about $4,000 for the Nicolet Foundation just selling these little pictures of various people freaking out as they're... By this point, I had kind of moved into a pattern of sort of a 2-year pattern of the plays that we did at Nicolet. We would do 3 shows that were generally pop shows, or at least audience pleasers, either comedies, maybe a musical, a well-known drama or something. But every 4th show, I would choose something kind of off the beaten path that was maybe a problem play that I wanted to try and fix, or was done by an unknown playwright. This is one of them, called Rocketman, from a playwright that I met during my time in Minneapolis. And it's a strange little story of a guy that imagines that if he can just configure a rocket, he can get out of this terrible life that he's in and move to a better life. And at the end of Act 1, he actually does it. And the whole set here of this attic opens up like a missile silo, and he transports to an alternative reality where all things are good, until we finally go back at the very end and find out that actually, no, he had committed suicide. So what a bummer of a play. I always wanted to do Harvey, but it requires 2 completely different sets, one in the parlor, and then the next scene, not even the next act, not even during an intermission. You need to transform to an insane hospital for this character who thinks he has a 6-foot rabbit as a best friend. But trying to build that kind of set onto our stage where there's no place to put it is almost impossible. But I decided to take it on anyway after seeing a production where in a stage similar where they managed to do it. So I'd like to just show you an animation of how we managed to transform this. So this is from a rehearsal. We go to blackout, the lights come up, and then everybody in the cast helps out with the scene shift. The first thing we do is get all of the scenery or all of the furniture taken off, and then we start moving all of the walls, which are designed to spin, pivot, track, roll, or whatever in the very limited space that we have. And everything has to be orchestrated just right. You have to move out that table at that exact point, or you won't be able to move it out. So in a very short amount of time, we transform from the parlor into the hospital on our little stage without moving a single thing off stage or into the flies. We rotated it all. I was so encouraged by that that the next play, the next year, I said, well, let's try and do my favorite farce, Noises Off, one of the funniest physical comedy shows ever. And the gimmick is very simple. You're watching a theater company trying to put on a comedy, but it's a very dysfunctional company and things go wrong. The big gimmick is you watch the play 3 times. The first time you watch a rehearsal and you're looking at from the front of the stage. Then you take a break. Act 2, we watch the exact same play, but this time we're watching it during opening night, but you're watching it from behind the set. So you literally have to spin the entire set around. And then the third act, you go back to the building. So we had to manage to take a 2-story set and rotate it on our stage. Now, on a bigger stage, it's real simple. You just build a gigantic turntable and you just rotate the whole things around. We can't do that. We've got nowhere stage right or left to store it. So this was the engineering trick that we did. This is from a dress rehearsal where we were just learning how to do it. We had to break the set into individual parts. And then we tracked them around to spin it. Now you'll notice that there's a gal carrying a hose. That is a pneumatic hose. And what happened is that would hook up to the set and would lift it up onto casters. It was pneumatic jacks that would raise the set up so that we could roll it around. And then when it was in place, we disconnect it and it drops back down onto the floor. And that's how we managed to do the whole set. It was broken up into 5 pieces and then rolled around. And now we're looking at the back of the set in getting ready for the second act. It was quite an engineering feat to get all of this managed to fit for the whole thing. And I got enough confidence from having done Harvey. Round about the same time, Kay had an exhibit of all of her costumes putting on in the art gallery where thousands of dollars, we probably have a $100,000 collection of costumes from Kay's work. I would stack up what Kay does against any professional costumer on Broadway. It's absolutely spectacular stuff. So for 1 month, the audience got a chance to look through all of that. A few years back, we were going to do a musical, but I had to postpone it because our music director took ill. So I brought in one of my plays in reserves. This was Love Letters, a play where basically 2 actors sit and read love letters that they had written to each other over the course of 40 years. So it's a relatively simple show to put on. You don't have to learn lines. So as a gimmick, I kind of cast it 3 times with Rich and Emily, who performed for one night, and then Kristen and Al, who performed on a second night, and then myself and Kay performed on a third night. Same play, just a different cast, and a relatively quick play that you can do in a pinch if for some reason you aren't able to do your main stage show. The main stage show that we were going to do was this one, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. It was a Broadway hit for a while. It's a problem show. The music is not all that great. It's very difficult to put on. So I tried to fix it by adding a lot of spectacle and trying to cultivate sort of a music hall feel to the whole thing. Part of what we had to have was a curtain and a proscenium, and our theater is not a theater with a curtain. You can't really fit in one. So we literally built this proscenium and then rigged this draped curtain that would lift up. We'd change the scenery behind it. The curtain would drop down. We'd perform a scene in front of it while we changed the scenery, and we would do that over and over. One of the habits that I got into in that before doing a play, I would just take 3 days off and I'd go to a B&B somewhere and I would just hold myself up and I would write down all the movement for the play and get the set designed and other things. This is a bed and breakfast in Oconomowoc, big old mansion with really, really unique trim for the whole thing. And I was getting kind of bored with having to do yet another set in a rich parlor. So for the next play, I actually took some pictures of this and then translated that into the games Afoot, the next play that we were doing. So we basically replicated that bed and breakfast. I sent them pictures of it, and they've got it on their website for this weird theater that suddenly stole the designs of their house. Christmas Carol, again, whole new cast, but the exact same set, same script. The only thing we duplicated is that the same guy showed up to play Scrooge, Jerry Scheidel, and he did a good job, so I cast him again. But otherwise, it's a brand new bunch of people, and again, big seller and a popular show. Finally, before the theater remodel, this was the very last play before the big remodel. A great little Irish play called Outside Mullingar, which also is multiple sets. So for the first set, it took place in a little Irish dining room. Then we would close these barn doors and they would perform the next scene in front of it. And in the meantime, there's a whole crew of people that are trying to be as quiet as they can. They're moving out that entire set and moving in a new set so that when these doors open, we have a new set. Outside Mullingar just a few years ago, 4 years ago, maybe the best comedy we did, certainly the biggest reactions and excellent acting from Anna and Dan Brecky. Here is our old theater. You can see there's a little wheelchair lift that went right there, 3 curtains that masked off the backstage. And here is the new theater after the remodel. Now, a lot of people, when they come into this theater after the remodel, they say, well, it looks like it's spruced up, but they don't quite know just how big some of the changes were. But they could see that there were still 3 sections and the stage there. So it looked like, well, they just kind of spruced it up, but there were some significant changes, and I'll just show you what they were. Here is the old theater. What used to be the semicircular stage with the wings built into it. When you exit stage right, you walk into the audience. This is the backstage. Here are the dressing rooms, which are way too small for modern standards. In fact, what kind of drove this whole remodel was that they did not fit ADA requirements. So we needed much bigger dressing rooms. We also had no way of getting a wheelchair onto the stage, which was not against code. So those were the 2 big things that had to be done. What the architect ultimately did is he took all 3 sections and he just rotated them slightly so that they were on center. Just unbolted the seats and removed them. Then they dug out this area right here and this area right here down to the level of the stage, so that when the theater was remodeled, you'll see that, oops. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to. Boy, sorry about that. Okay, so they moved the audience so that it was centered. Now we no longer have an asymmetrical stage. It's pretty well symmetrical, and now the audience is looking straight onto it rather than off kilter. We have a wheelchair ramp that comes in here. We put some curtains in on either side, and now there was an exit off left and off right that was at the same level as the stage, so we could roll things off. In the back area, which used to be just ventilation ducts, they knocked a hole in the wall and put a door so that you could pass down in here to a green room area, out through these, and now you could cross around from one stage to the other side. A big area for a workshop here. This is where the dressing rooms used to be. Now that becomes sort of the scene shop. The dressing rooms were moved to where the public restrooms used to be. That's why the restrooms are no longer at the end of the building. They're back at the entrance. So these became the dressing rooms. The light booth that used to be in this little janitor's closet was moved over to a much bigger room right there. And then there were also some offices. And this is the remodel. Here is the original stage right here, and everything else was completely ripped out. Walls added to block off the backstage from the audience. Stage was completed. Last thing, after all the walls were put in, still covered with cedar, still trying to follow the Frank Lloyd Wright feel. The stage floor was covered with an inch of neoprene foam, and then layers of composite wood was laid on top of that. So the entire floor is sprung slightly, which enables us to bring in dance troops. And the first show that we did with the new theater was Arsenic and Old Lace, a great chestnut, just in sort of the same vein as You Can't Take It With You, and a big set, including 2 stories where Teddy Roosevelt would yell "charge" running up the stairs, which we were finally able to do because we had enough room above the stage. An Off the Beaten Path play, some of you may remember this, it was just a few years ago, God of Carnage. This play had the F word more than any other play I had ever done. I think I've only had the F word show up maybe once in a particular title, but this was loaded with it. It's a really rip-roaring play about 2 arguing couples. And again, not all that well attended, but a very, very good performance by 4 of our veteran actors. And if you look, the part of the design of this set was taken from a restaurant in Delavan, Wisconsin. I really liked the look that they had. I just stole it. Third Shakespeare play, Midsummer Night's Dream, the 3 plays that you can do that has cast with lots of women and is accessible and understandable for the audience. And this was, I'm very proud of this show. Once again, using a lot of high school talent in order to be able to fill out the cast. Kay's costumes at her best with the little fairies and the king and queen of the fairies, a very naturalistic set, and lots of physical action. We spent a lot of time choreographing, lots of fights and struggles, particularly amongst the 4 teens that make up the action. She actually does a running leap and jumps at this particular character, and lots of laughs. And a sprayed set. So just before I performed the set, I had to get into a hazmat suit in order to spray all this foam. And then we sprayed all the foam onto the set, and then we had to carve it to create the look of rocks and other things. We took gigantic concrete pouring tubes, covered them with foam, and then shaved that down to make it look like tree trunks. Lots and lots of lighting and a pretty rich set. Now, just a year and a half ago, a great little comedy called Over the River and Through the Woods about a guy and his 2 sets of doting and somewhat interfering grandparents, along with a full meal that we ate on stage. The Crucible, just a year and a half ago by Arthur Miller, again filled with lots and lots of high school people, a heavy drama about the Salem witch trials, very, very dramatic, very, very powerful, and the audience came out to see the whole thing. With sets built out of styrofoam beams that moved and adjusted depending on each particular scene, or actually started tilting in on everything. And then finally, the last play that I did was the 4th play in the cycle, the Off the Beaten Path play. I chose this very, very quirky little play called The Art of Dining, about a couple that is going frantic as they're trying to prepare meals for all of the people. The play had problems, so we did some adjustments to try and do it. And then my final play before I retired was going to be Picnic by William Inge. And that got canceled because of the COVID type thing. And that's where we had to stop. And that's where we're out of time. I'm going to bring back the audio. And if anybody wants to hang around and has any questions or something, I'd be glad to field those questions. Oh, Gretchen says that her son worked on the woodwork in the courtroom. I don't know if other of you can see the comments here in the chat area. That's great. That was a top-notch job that they did in the courtroom.
Did you see my note that Dale Wasserman was here for Cuckoo's Nest?
Yes, I did. Yeah, thank you for confirming that.
Can you talk to the future of what's going to happen with the theater? I mean, maybe not you, but perhaps Mike? When I retired, the college wasn't quite sure what to do with the position because I was taking on a lot of things and wearing a lot of hats. I taught the classes, I directed the Nicolet Players shows, I managed the performing arts series, and also managed the whole theater complex and the technology. One of the things that they did was to create a full-time position, Mike Effinger's position, for those of you that know Mike. And that position is the theater manager, takes care of all of the technology which we have, and you need to have somebody who really knows theater technology because with the remodel, we've got equipment that your average person just would never make heads or tails of. So he's managing the theater complex, and if we set the whole coronavirus aside, he is also going to be taking over the Nicolet Live Performing Arts series and managing that. As far as the classes go, they're either getting adjuncts or they're just not offering the core classes that I taught. I don't know what's going to happen with the Nicolet Players, and even if we ignored the coronavirus, I don't think they've got a plan for it. They're not coming up with anything other than hoping that Jim will continue to keep directing the plays. And I told them that I'd be glad to do it for 1 year and keep the things running. But I don't know what's going to be happening next. And I haven't heard anything. I don't even know what's happening in the spring. I sent an email out last week saying, what are we going to have a spring show? But I just haven't heard anything back. So I can only guess what's happening as far as a spring play, given that we are getting worse with the virus than anything else. I doubt if they're going to be holding one for an audience. And frankly, even if we had it isolated where there's only 40 people in the audience, boy, you put in all of that time to do a play, and it's a real downer for the actors to have a really tiny crowd. So in the immediate future, doubtful that there will be a spring production. I am available, and I would be glad. I kept this job for so long because that's the thing that I like doing, directing plays. And this has been a fantastic job, as you can see from all of the shows that we've been able to do here. It's a great job to have, to be able to direct all these plays. And I love working with the actors, and I love the audience up here. But ultimately, the college for 50 years had a full-time person managing the Nicolet Players. And that's how it's managed to stick around for 50 years, is there's been a full-time person running the players. And I don't know what they're going to be doing or what the plans are. They may try to just sort of find people that will fill in and direct it show by show using local people or whatever. For 40 years, starting with Phil, who was well-trained in theater. I have a graduate degree in theater and lots of experience. The college brought in somebody that knew theater and ran the program. So I'm not sure what the plan is. I'm not sure how well the Nicolet Players will survive if it just goes from a show to show to show basis, because really, the Nicolet Players over the years, they've had rough times. They've had points where their membership dropped. We had to rebuild audiences and other things. It's really kind of a full-time job keeping that organization going. So I don't know what the college has plans. I will help out as much as I can, but there's going to come a point where I'm just going to say, no, I don't think I'm going to do another play, and I don't know what they'll have planned at that point. All of the other community theaters in existence go through that, where, you know, Three Lakes had a fantastic theater, a community theater program, but when the creators of that program got a little tired and just said, you know, I don't want to direct shows, they got a couple people to fill in, but there finally came a show where people just said, you know, I don't want to direct it, and then they stop, and that's usually when that organization folds. And up here in the Northwoods and everywhere, there's example after example of that, you know, people get tired and they stop doing it, and then the organization stops. As opposed to Nicolet Players and Nicolet College, where there's been a person who it's their job. And that's what keeps that, they rebuild the program and keep on going because that's their paycheck. That's their job description, is to keep this thing alive and serving the community. So I'm not sure. I've been trying to get an answer out of the administration of what the plans are, and they're just mum about it. And then the coronavirus came along, and everything's put on hold right there. So there will come a point where they'll finally say, here's what our plan is, and my intent is, if it seems like it's a plan that's not going to keep this group thriving, I'll let people know. But right now, it's just wait and see. That's a long answer to your question.
And a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I don't know if the program just stops. I've got more things that I can show you if you want. I've got a little 13-minute movie where I will take you on a tour of Backstage if anybody wants to stick around and watch that, or I can field any other questions. It's up to you guys. Brenda, does the Zoom thing just stop at a point, or does it continue on, or what?
It continues on for a little bit longer. I think we had set it for 3. Gretchen, do you remember how long we had set this for?
I don't remember, but I know that Zoom will let, and on this version of Zoom, it'll let you go for, I think it's 24 hours with 100 people. So it's, if Jim wants to talk for 24 hours.
Well, as you can tell, this was supposed to be 100 minutes, and I barely got it in under 2 hours. So I can talk about all this stuff for ages and ages, because I do love it. So would you guys like to see the little tour of Backstage?
Jim?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I sent you an email or chat, and just thanking you. But here's the thing. I know that there are some people who have missed this class. And if you don't mind continuing on with your tour, I know we're going to be showing it again, because again, like I said, there's a lot of interest yet out there. And some people have been trying to contact me here even during this time. And I've just,
okay.
I just said we'll be showing it again.
Okay, good. Yeah, we did this in the theater partly so that Mike could have this set up. He's recorded this actual presentation. So, you know, now we've got a document of the whole thing. It can be shown anytime you want, because you and the LIR now own it. So, and of course, I'd be glad to come back and talk more and more and more, whether it's live or on Zoom as well.
Okay. So you already have this, the 15-minute video already recorded?
Yeah, I did this yesterday.
Okay.
I just did a walkthrough talking about the creation of the, or the remodels, and it gives people a chance to walk backstage and through the green room and other things. So if anybody wants to watch that, I will play it now. It's 13 minutes long. Feel free to watch it. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.
I hope you all just ran to the bathroom or something when you needed to. It's like watching a football game. So let me switch to the movie and show you a tour of the theater.
Standing at the top of the second aisle, looking out over the theater, the newly remodeled theater, this wall right here is where the light booth used to be, where that light sconce is where a window used to be. There's our wheelchair ramp, the stage, which is now symmetrically set, and left, center, and right sections. The control booth is now over to the right of the audience, where we have a much, much better view and much, much more room. As we walk down the aisle and approach the stage, you will see up in the ceiling a tremendous amount of lights. In the old theater, that was just a 12-foot high ceiling, and there was no room or power to put any lights. I would just occasionally put up a few if I needed something special. But the architect chose to completely tear out the entire suspended ceiling and try and get this grid of lights up as high as possible. And you will see that about 60% of our inventory is now directly above the stage, which is the way it really should be, because you want light that is coming down and from the sides rather than from the front, because that's how you sculpt a character and make things stand out much, much more. Almost all of the lights that we use are LED lights. We still have a bunch of incandescent lights. In fact, over half the lights that are in the ceiling are the old incandescent lights from the old theater. But when we got new LED lights, we use those as much as we can, because they save a lot of electricity. And the wonderful thing is with your lighting computer, you can just simply change the color with the touch of a button, rather than having to climb up on a ladder and change the gel. So they are a huge advancement in the evolution of lighting control. Now, off to the side here, I'm crossing stage right. I am now walking into what used to be the left section of the audience, but with the new remodel, we have torn out that section somewhat so that we have a stage right wing area. This is where we keep most of our audio and lighting equipment. A platform that we built holds all of our electrical equipment, and a little shop area where we can work on electronics and other things. Hidden underneath that platform is our 7-foot Mason and Hamlin Steinway, or excuse me, Mason and Hamlin grand piano that we roll out for concerts. And that's tucked nicely and safely underneath that platform and plugged into a humidifier so that it stays in optimal condition. Various other equipment, all of the cables and other things for lighting, but mostly it's just an empty space so that the actors can get ready to go on, but it's also a place where you can move the scenery. Now, the back wall, which just used to be a wall that you were not able to get in, through, or around, we had a door put in, and we will travel now through this door into what used to be just a ventilation area that was off limits. But now with the remodel, all the ventilation is tucked up above here, leaving this room open for us to have a green room for people to wait behind the stage. But most importantly, it becomes a crossover area where I'm able to go through this door, go behind the wall, and move on to the other side of the stage. Of course, it's a theater, so we use every available space to try and hold as much costumes and other storage things that we can. So this little area right here is all of the hats that we have. The musicians, the touring musicians and bands just absolutely love these things and want to wear all of them. And we try and discourage that as best we can. Passing through right here, we'll take a look. These little banquettes are places for the actors to sit, but also the seats can be removed and there's storage underneath there, and that's where we keep all of the pergo laminate floor that is placed upon the stage when we want the stage to look nice, but then we pull it all up and store it back here. so that we can then build sets on top of it and paint the floor when we're doing actual play production. A nice big television set so the actors can watch a little bit of the action, a little sink area and place for the groups that sometimes require a little bit of food backstage. I keep walking further left, and this little unused area that used to be the cooling tower in the old system now is a huge costume storage area. It's dry, it's well organized, it's well lit, and this is where we keep our thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of costumes that mostly have been built by Kay over the years. I think we have well over $100,000 worth of costumes that have been created over the years. Extremely high quality things that I would stack up against any professionally done costume company around. And then all the other costume bits and other things. So this is just a storage room and an additional place for actors to sort of hide as they're waiting before they go on stage. Part of the sound system, all the amplifiers and other things for our concert sound. A cast gift that a cast gave me for a Midsummer Night's Dream, a nice blanket that I turned into as a wall hanging. And then as we walk through here, we're now coming out behind the tabs stage left, and more open space where we can put scenery and other things, and our scene shop, where we keep all of our tools. It's big and spacious. There's lots of room to build things. We got some much better cabinets rather than just pegboards where we put everything. The hardware, brooms, and then a nifty little paint area. We had a little slop sink added, and then a little paint mixing area, and all of our color tints and other things so that I can sit or stand right here, mix all of my paint. I put up all my color samples and everything else right here, and I have a nice little station where I can create everything. Back in the old theater, you had to do this on the floor in a little carpet area in front of a dressing room. And now we finally got a beautiful place where we can paint all of, or prepare all of our paint. Little rolling racks that we built that holds all of the paint that we may need for various shows, a little bit of storage. Up above here is a little mezzanine platform that acts as a little bit of storage area, but also there is a door that leads out to the back of the building where we have a little garage where we keep most of our lumber and other things. And now, instead of taking our lumber and platforms and carrying them down the asphalt into the cafeteria and through the doors of the theater, we can now bring all that lumber directly into the theater on this platform and drop it down off the edge to the stage. And turning around, this is where the actors or the musicians will be standing. The tabs just hide them from the audience, and when it's time to make their entrance, they just simply walk onto the stage. This is the walk that I would usually make if I'm going to be introducing the next concert. You walk to center, say hello to the audience, introduce the band, and exit. The band comes out and begins their performance, or the actors begin. The steps now lead up to the original level that was here. Looking out over here, this is where the dressing rooms used to be. In this little area, little two-person dressing rooms, very, very small, not handicapped accessible. So the architect expanded this area, and we're now walking through what used to be the public restrooms. But now we have two very spacious dressing rooms for men and women. Again, storage put wherever we can, but a nice little set of 3 stations for people to get into their costume and makeup. A little coffee set up there if we need. The little band board here that every time we have a touring group, we recommend or we urge them to take one of their stickers and stick it up on the board. Hopefully that'll just get more and more crowded. Second dressing room. Right now it's called the women's dressing room, but it really depends on the size of the show. If there's more women than men in the cast, we usually switch the dressing rooms around. 3 little stations for people to put on their makeup, our wig storage, a restroom attached to each one of the dressing rooms. And then we cross out. Here's a little door that leads to the little back area. So it's an access for people to get directly into the audience. But during performances, that's usually just closed. Going further down, here is the original Abe, the painting that was donated 20 years ago, but has been in almost all of our shows since then, as well as various other Abes that we have used in other shows. And here is the brains of all the technology. It is our control room that controls all of the lights and sound. And Mike Effinger has also put in a little video suite, because the theater right now with the coronavirus, we're doing a lot of live video presentations rather than filling up the people with audience. So we have wired the theater much more for video control. That unit right there is our computer that controls all of the lighting. This is our video and sound equipment. This is the sound mixing rack with a nice view of the stage. This sound rack also can be controlled by a little simple tablet. So most of the time, sound people don't want to sit behind a window of a booth. They want to be out in the middle of the auditorium. So instead of just taking an entire big sound rack and moving it out there, they can now control things with just a simple little tablet and walk around the theater wherever they want. More storage down here. One room that was just going to be an empty area, we turned into a room for our prop storage. Just enough room to be able to hold everything. Moving into the office of the theater director. Say everyone say hello to Mike Effinger, who is the current director of theater, replacing me when I retired back in June. The best view of the campus that we could find from this office, looking out over the beautiful Lake Julia here, and then a doorway going through the stairwell. And out into the lounge area. And we're having our first snowstorm of the year. And a new addition to the lounge area. The last thing that was installed just before my retirement took effect is this beautiful ceiling lighting. So we don't have these horrible white lights making the lounge area look like a cafeteria. We have finally got some very nice lighting that makes this much softer and more inviting. And of course, the original fireplace is still here. And that's the end of that tour. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Yep.
Very interesting tour.
Well, thank you very much. All right, we'll wait till there's another time somewhere down the road. I think Mary just emailed me and said, what do you want to do in the spring? And I'll think about it and we'll see what we do next.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Bye, Jim.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.